So good evening. It is 6 p.m. on November 30th. This is the Hrpb meeting. Mr. Chairman.
All right, we'll call this to order. This is the City of Lake Worth Beach Historic Resources Preservation Board meeting for Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. I'd like to have the roll call and any reporting of absences.
Steve Pickett,
Here.
Chip Guthrie,
Here.
Bob Dorenzo,
Here.
Jamie Foreman, Nadine Heights,
Here.
Tricia, Halson Mishler, Mariana Gonzalez. You have a quorum.
We have to turn our mics on, push the little push button in the middle. Yeah, that turns it on. Okay. No problem.
All right, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, any additions, deletions, reordering?
We are going to have a deletion / continuation, 324 North K Street. What was item C will likely have to be continued to the January meeting because they did not meet their mailing notice deadline.
Okay.
So when we get to that item, just it's an FYI, when the item comes up, we'll need a motion and a second to continue it.
Okay.
They advertised their legal notice in the paper, but they did not do their mailer. So we can't hear them tonight. So if we continue it, we don't have to renotice it in the newspaper.
Okay.
So you basically just do the motion of continuation.
Sure, we can do it now.
Motion.
Yeah, just go out of order, just get it out of the
You have
way.
to open it.
Okay.
Have to read the number, read it.
Yeah, that's why we usually just save it for the item,
All
but
right, we'll
you,
just wait till the item then. All right, approval of the minutes. We have motion. Do we have to do each one of the minutes as a separate, or we can approve them all at once? Okay. I have a motion to approve the minutes. Second.
Second.
All right, it's been motioned and seconded, all saying aye. Aye, nay. Okay, it's approved unanimously. Okay, so now we'll have the swearing in of staff and applicants.
If you plan to give testimony this evening, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, say yes. Thank you.
And I see in the packet that we have the proof of publication. So we already did the withdrawals, postponements, and there's no consent. So we'll move on to new business now. And
Mr. Chair, if you would please call for board disclosures.
oh, right, yes, any disclosure.
Turn on your mics and speak into them, please.
I have no disclosure.
I have no disclosures. No disclosure.
All right, on to new business. We will start with item A, Hrpb project number 2200100376. Consideration of a certificate of appropriateness for front door replacement of a single family house located at 432 South Elf Street. Subject property is contributing resource within the Southeast Luzerne Historic District and is located in a single family residential zoning district, future land use medium density residential.
Awesome.
Okay, there we go. So good evening. For the record, this is Annie Greening, Senior Preservation Planner for the City of Lake Worth Beach. Like our chair said, this is project number 22-100-376 for a COA for the front door replacement at 432 South L Street. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is just our location map and the property description. It's on the east side of South L Street between 4th and 5th Avenue South. Next slide. Awesome. So this is just a quick project background. Initial application was back in March. We were able to get the windows into compliance and approved back in August. And we had this same property come before the board on September 14th for front and rear doors. The board approved the request for a raised 6-panel door on the rear and conditioned that the front door did have to comply with our historic preservation design guidelines. If we could go to the next slide. So after that Hrpb meeting, staff has been working with the applicant to offer examples of appropriate front doors that are impact or HVAC rated, which is just the higher hurricane rating. The property owner did purchase a front door. Unfortunately, that door was more appropriate for a Mission or Mediterranean revival style. So per direction from our assistant director and the director of community sustainability, staff can't approve the client's or the applicant's door that was purchased. So after request from the applicant, we are bringing it here to the next board meeting. Next slide. So these are the photos of the current front door. It's a raised 6-panel door. The home, although it did have a stucco veneer applied later, it is most closely aligned with wood frame vernacular style. And that is the style that we're using in the design guidelines for this home. So here's just a couple photos of the applicant's preferred door, the one that was purchased. It's a little harder to see on the left, but that is what they ordered. It's got the 9 lights over the 1 panel with the vertical tongue and groove design. We could go to the next slide. So here are just kind of a selection of some of the doors that staff offered and recommended that would be appropriate for the style. The 2 on the far right, the 2 white doors, are ones that the director, William Waters, authorized staff to offer to the applicant as sort of a compromise, as they are very similar to the doors that the applicant prefers, but they have a plain panel design that is more in line with our historic design guidelines for this style. So this is just a screenshot of the design guidelines for wood frame vernacular. Typically, they're 6-panel recessed, 15 light French, or a half panel, half glazed. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about that tongue and groove look on the preferred door, it's more appropriate for a Mission or Mediterranean revival style. Those styles typically had panel doors. And so that vertical tongue and groove is typically what we offer people as an easier to find door for these styles when they're replacing them, since the panel doors are difficult to find. Next. Awesome. So in conclusion, staff concludes that the application is not consistent with the design guidelines and recommends denial as it is more appropriate for a different style. However, as always, staff also recommends that you all discuss whether the door is appropriate for the building as the board. Next slide. And here are just our potential motions. And I believe the applicant is also here to speak tonight.
Great, thank you. Hi, Dave Battelle. I live at Eagles Nest Drive, Jupiter, Florida. My wife and I own the property. My son lives there. This door thing has been going on over a year now, and there's no good reason why we can't come to an agreement on whatever changes need to be made to this. The first door I bought cost me at least $250 because that was the one where I was told whatever you take out is what you got to put back in, but that didn't fly. If I have to bring this door back, it's going to be at least another $300 according to Home Depot for the restock fee. And I'm just not going to buy another door. There's no reason why we can't make this work. Now, why HVAC? Well, Hurricane Ian. Also, I mean, we're in a zone that I think, any door should be HVAC rated. And as one board member pointed out, said it all in one word, insurance. So that's where the world's headed. HVAC is Broward County, it's Miami-Dade County. And the insurance, I think, is going to have the last say on that. After the last meeting, I inquired about other doors that were available. The staff there presented one door that was had an HVAC option. It was $2,700, and it also required custom modification to meet their guidelines. So we're north of $2,700 on that door. They then recommended another door from a catalog. That door was no longer manufactured. I called the manufacturer. They suggested the door that we have here. Why did I buy it? Well, because Hurricane Ian slammed Florida. And the day after, my wife said we had to leave on a family thing for her family in North Carolina. She said, if you're going to buy a door, you better do it now. So anyway, that's why I bought the door. And it looked identical to the door that was in the catalog that was recommended to me. That's no longer manufactured. Now, let's see, in terms of some of the other doors that we have here, the door that I wanted was, it was about $1,800. So it's $850 less than the initial door. And so I keep hearing that they can't approve these things because of the historic preservation guidelines. I think this door is absolutely on the 50-yard line of what would be appropriate for this. So I don't see it as any type of an exception. I think Annie went through some of the pictures of the doors, but anyway, if I may quickly, there's some copies here. This is
A note for the record, we are receiving filing. If you could receive and file, Mr. Chair, a handout from the applicant.
and
It's the design guidelines with,
yes, I mean, just to look at some of these doors, I mean, some of them are obviously different, but door A, I mean, you have the 6 panel, the raised panels have been removed from the drawing that are on the door. For door B, for whatever reason, the drawing has eliminated the 3 raised panels below, and it's also added raised muntins. The other door C, the raised panels have been removed from the drawing. As far as D, that's a nice picture, but it's not a picture of a door. So, but anyway, I guess, Aaron, if I might ask for doors B and C, I mean, why do the drawings, not have the raised panels that are in the actual pictures?
so the photographs are photographs of recessed panels, and the drawings do not depict raised panels because recessed panels are in the picture. So a recessed panel is different than a raised panel. And at the time of construction, the recessed panel was indicative of a frame vernacular. They would not have been able to manufacture a raised panel door during the time of our wood frame vernacular. So that would not have been allowed. And that is why staff provided the, again, because this has had some modification, that's why staff provided the compromise of the door with the raised panel below to most closely mimic number C. The issue with the door the applicant provided, as Annie stated, is the fact that it is a tongue and groove style versus a raised panel style. All of this is a super compromise from what we normally require. It is, it's not a perfect example of vernacular, so that's why staff went with a compromise. It's up to you all as a board to decide, is what the applicant purchased a bridge even farther than the compromise that the staff proposed. So.
Well, if you look at the picture in the catalog, B looks like there's 3 panels that are raised so that they're flush, but we're talking about raised panels. We're talking about panels that are raised that are flush to the exterior of the door.
Item B shows recessed panels. You can see that the panel is recessed, and then there's a bracket going across.
Cool.
So, and then the difference in how the panels are recessed and is kind of left open. So because there were different examples within the city. So that is a recessed panel, and so is the door, the photograph of the door.
It doesn't look recessed. in the picture. But anyway, they will approve a door next door E, which is the Plus Pro, which is the 3. I mean, I don't see where there's a door anywhere like that in the whole historic preservation guidelines. If you look at door, so anyway, it just shows that I think they have considerable flexibility to approve these things. If you look at the Masonite door catalog, F, G, and H, this is how it's presented in the catalog. They say, yes, you can do 106-1. Yes, you can do 106-2, but no, you can't do 106-1. And that's all provided that I fabricate muntins, raise muntins for these. And I also offered to cover this offending panel that's below there so that, you know, there would not be a plank, a panel. So it would look more like F. But they said that that was not acceptable. Me covering that area, that, you know, again, the door had to be declined.
Sure. For sure. Mhm. And just keep in mind, some of what there's so much we can do administratively. And then it gets to a point where there's too many compromises or there's too much, and then that rises to the board level to discuss. And so this is why this is before you, is because we brought it before you, we received direction that it should comply with the guidelines. We offered a compromise that the applicant purchased this door because they purchased the door and they don't want to pay the fee to the restocking fee. They're back here. So this is the door.
The door is purchased here.
On the right.
Well, I think they're both the same.
Okay, so this one has buttons and that one doesn't.
Yeah, the one on
Oh, yeah,
the left, we just put the one on the right because it was a little easier to see the
Oh.
panel below.
So that has the divided light.
Yes,
Okay.
it has the divided light.
No, I'm told that I have to fabricate the muttons for this. So even if you approve it, I still have to fabricate muttons for this thing or have somebody do it. So, so that's been resolved. And while I'm fabricating muttons, I said I could put a panel over that so that, you know, it would be covered.
It
And,
looked like. Yeah.
yeah,
I'll be honest, I don't recall that conversation.
yeah, I have it in writing.
Okay, great.
And we also, when we talked about it on the telephone, when the meeting on the November 30th, I brought it up again as to, can I just cover this? And you said, no, we can't. We have to go to the board on this.
I think
So-
it's good that we're at the board. I think it's for you all to decide.
You're okay with the buttons and covering the panel?
Yes.
I'm okay with it. I think he's made a lot of efforts to comply.
How will the common group be covered?
That's not hard to do. I mean, I can cover it with whatever. I mean, there are different materials that are out there. I can put a border around it. Whether it's, I believe the door is fiberglass. So, I've got a full wood shop. I do fiberglass work. I mean, you have to own one of these houses. Oh my gosh.
I think that if the muntins are five and the bottom and is under, make it flat. Then it would comply with, what I can see, it looks like it would comply with. For the guideline for that style building. Even though originally we were looking for it in the original building set.
Right.
I would be inclined to say. As long as the verticals are covered.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
I love owning my historic home. A question, if you modify this door, are you in any way going to interrupt your hurricane guidelines warranty for your insurance company?
No, I mean,
If you're drilling things into it and modifying
Yeah,
it?
what I told them was that I can cover this, but I can't create a recess in the door. Because yes, a recess would, I think, void the warranty on the door.
And your insurance company might have a problem. So,
yes.
and also when you set in these inlays for creating, because right, you're gonna have to create those.
They're applied with glue on the glass.
Okay, you're right. So no drilling, no nothing to modify. That
Correct.
was my only question, that if you modify, is that gonna be a problem?
No,
Sounds like no.
if it was, then
Okay.
we'd be,
Just
you know, okay.
Want a motion?
And one public comment. And this one comes from James Rock. James Rockwell. 824 North J Street. States. Review the agenda packet, which have it on record. This placement door purchased by the owners for the property located at 432 South L Street appears to be a fine, attractive, and well-made door. Whether or not this particular door does or does not match the architectural profile of the home is just so. You're talking about a door here, right? This door is a very nice door, and I seriously doubt that any average resident in the city really cares about the appropriate architectural features of this door. At the end of the day, I'm sure the vast majority of city staff in their cars to drive home to Delray, Boynton, or Wellington. However, the members of the board live in the city. Otherwise, you do not be qualified to be on the board.
Let me just say, my idea is not to fight this. I mean, I believe in what you're doing and I wanted to.
Sir, wait, and your time, sir, honestly, they've made a motion, so we've got to hear public comment. So if they ask you another question, you can respond, but your time is like over.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm gonna finish and cover the members of the board live in the city. And otherwise, they would not be qualified to be on the board. The cases that come before you will directly affect your neighbors in your neighborhoods and ultimately you. Therefore, it is the members of the board's responsibility to be an advocate for your neighbors and not blindly follow the recommendations of staff. I have heard some of you mention that you do not wish to set a certain precedent by overriding that recommendation, but that is exactly what this board should do, override those recommendations, especially when they don't make any sense. And in this case, they are overly silly. Set the precedent. City staff follow guidelines, but that does not mean it's the best decision. Every situation is unique, and what works in one place may not work in another. In this case, approve the door. And that's the end of the comment. Thank you.
That's all the comments.
That's it.
So finish discussion, election. Other modest, modest.
No.
I move to approve HRPB project number 22-00100376 for a certificate of appropriateness for front door replacement for the property located at 432 South L Street, based upon the competent substantial evidence in the staff report and pursuant to the City of Lake Worth Beach land development regulations and historic preservation requirements.
And Nadine, just to clarify that was included with the board direction to do as the applicant had requested, which was to modify the bottom panel to smooth it out. Okay.
Yeah, so you've added that for the record, so great.
Thank you.
Second, also adding the numbers.
Yes, the muntins are required.
And so- Motion and second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. That's unanimous.
Thank you so much.
Just for the record, I don't know who that is. This. Group?
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah. All right. Hrpb project number 201000370. Consideration of the certificate of appropriateness for demolition of the existing structure and construction by new 6,145 square foot single family residence located at 1120 South Lakeside Drive. Same property is located in the single family residence zoning district. It's not from the on article.
Awesome. So once again, for the record, this is Annie Greening, Senior Preservation Planner for the City of Lake Worth Beach. If we could go to the next slide, please, Erin.
Oh, sure.
So here we've got our location map. The property's on the east side of South Lakeside Drive between 11th and 12th Avenue South. And like our chair said, this is in the single family zoning district and will continue to be in our future land use designation. So here is the lot currently. The remaining residential structure was built in 1951. It had major renovations and additions back in 1973, and the structure is non-contributing in the South Palm Park Historic District. So the phased demolition of this property was approved by the HRPB on March 11th of 2020. And this demolition request as part of the new construction is that final phase of demolition. And so here we've got a screenshot of our county flood maps, and we actually have our building official, Peter Ringel, here to do a little discussion about those, since those are a big deal in this project.
Good evening, Board. Peter Ringel, building official for the city of Lake Worth Beach, and I'm also the city's floodplain manager and a certified floodplain manager. I will keep this brief, but just a little bit of history. The current screen that you have on there is the flood map as it is proposed. It is not adopted yet. There is an existing map from 2016. The new maps, when they get adopted, will have to be enforced, and they raise the flood elevation at this property 3 feet above the current flood maps. So currently, the property has 3 flood zones on it. It's AE6, AE7, and VE8. The VE is closest to the intercoastal. AE is shallow flooding. VE is wave action, 1 to 3 feet at this location. The new flood zone is 9, 10, and 11 are the proposed flood zones. So if this project comes in for permitting after the maps are adopted, they would have to have the lowest horizontal member at 12 feet. Okay, that's not the finished floor. That's the lowest portion of a grade beam. And also with the new map, they are not allowed to use structural fill. So when you put sidewalks down, when you put foundations, you have to do a deep foundation, and any sidewalks that are there cannot be supported by fill. So they would need to put pilings in to have sidewalks on if they chose to do that. Otherwise, they have to build at grade. So that's what the no structural fill means. If you have further questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. Or as the meeting goes on, I will be happy to answer questions as they arise.
And so this application is if the VE zone is growing, the LIMWA is going to be adopted, and they'll be within the LIMWA, which doesn't allow structural fill, which is the limited moderate wave action line, which is the little triangular line. So there's a lot of things happening on this, and the new maps are pending. They've been adopted, but they're pending litigation, or they're
The new maps have been proposed. Palm Beach County sent a challenge in. I won't get into the technical aspects of it, but basically the county had new aerial LiDAR data, which is what they use to base the maps on. But the FEMA used information from 2007, and the county had information from 2014. So that's why they challenged the maps to get more accurate maps.
So we don't know if the county challenge, there's a lot of things in the air, but basically this project is proposed with the finished floor at 13. And you're going to hear the term now, NAVD, which NAVD is, what's the word? It's
It's basically the measuring system used. Okay, and to give you reference, 13 feet NAVD is 9.5 feet above king tide.
So it's called a datum. And so what a datum does is it allows us to all agree where zero starts, right? Because we all have different, zero feet has been measured differently over time. So this is the newest datum, right? And it shows us where zero is. Now the existing grade on this lot is about 3 feet, 8 inches, right in that ballpark, depending on where you are on the lot. So it's a little over 3 feet. or it's almost 4 feet, really. It's like 3 feet, 3.75 feet, right? So on average. So where the finished floor elevation has to be, or the lowest structural beam has to be at 12. So you're looking at a difference of really like, what is that? Like
8 to 9 feet.
8. Yeah, probably around 8.5 feet. So so Peter's going to hang out. So if you guys have any questions, so we have had a few of these, and part of the presentation that Annie was going to run you through is one, what is the ask here? And there's some concerns with this one, and you saw that in your packet. And one of the concerns is that we require fence height to be measured from the natural grade. So part of the proposal, which is not consistent with our code, and the applicant knows that, and they're going to have to work it out, is that they cannot put a fence on top of fill, because the fence, and you can see it here in their original application, was too high. We can work some of that out on the backside, so we didn't want to keep them from public hearing, but this is not allowed. You cannot put a fence functionally 13 feet over your neighbor's yard. Okay, so that has to change. And then how that change is, and how that discussion will be part of the discussion today. And then the applicant will also present after we present to provide that understanding of what their thoughts are and what their plan is. So Peter, you're on call. Annie, if you want to keep going.
Actually, I have some questions, but if I can wait until the presentation is finished.
No, we need to finish the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay? Or did you have questions specifically about the map? Did you all? Okay.
Okay, so yeah, what we've got up here is the proposed streetscape view. You can see the height of the residence overall is considerably taller than most neighboring structures, except for that one directly to the south of it. The increase in base flood elevation is accounting for a lot of that height increase. If we could go to the next slide. So this is our proposed site plan. So you can see here that the building itself is set back pretty far from the street. Part of that is just what is required for this particular area, but it does also help account for a little bit of mitigation for that increased height. We've got some room to slope upwards. If we could go to the next slide. Awesome. So we're back at the streetscape one more time. Basically, what we're talking about here in terms of fill and fencing, and again, we might get into this a little more later. So the impacts, again, are a bit mitigated by that setback, but staff believes that terracing or sloping or finding some other way to do something that's not just fill on this site would make it more compatible with the neighboring structures and a little more of a gentle impact to the neighboring community, in addition to, of course, the fact that the fence needs to be back down at that natural grade.
And over time, I mean, this is the new FEMA. This is, this is what we are all facing in South Florida in coastal areas. We pulled the Miami Beach has a typology study done by Schulman and Associates, which is a well-regarded architectural firm where they did typologies on raising structures for adaptation. We're going to bring those discussions back to you, and we're going to walk through some examples today. But this is the challenge facing all coastal communities in South Florida today.
All right, so on to the next slide, a little bit more into the design. Here are the front and rear elevations of the proposed structure. You can see it's a contemporary / mid-century modern influenced building. We'll go next slide. We've got our side elevations here. You can see that garage that has that side entrance. Next slide. And then really quick, we've got our floor plans for the building. It is 2 stories tall. So on the next slide, we've got level 2. Awesome. And then if we could go one more time. So getting into our zoning discussion, the proposed construction is consistent with all of our zoning requirements established in the LDRs, except for that fence height, because it does have to be measured from the natural grade rather than the additional fills grade. The next slide. So here we just kind of zoomed in on that building so you can see where that fence would be, especially compared to the neighbor to the north, that 1-story building. So staff has drafted a condition of approval clarifying that review and approval of that fence height will occur at building permit. And then again, we would love to discuss tonight some other options, including terracing or sloping that proposed fill. Next slide. Oh.
And I will just add that one of the conditions of approval does require additional review of the single family in conjunction with our civil engineer, the city engineer, to ensure that the drainage requirements, because they cannot drain onto their neighbor's property. So they can't dump water to the property to the north or the south. And that is going to be challenging along the side property line. So there's probably going to be some additional things that are going to have to happen on this property that may not typically occur on a normal single family property to ensure that those adjacent property owners are protected from any type of drainage or sheet flow off the property.
So then here, like Aaron said earlier, we're just going to go through really quick some examples of buildings that have been approved by the Hrpb in the past few years that have also faced varying levels of base flood elevation mitigation. So this first one at 920 South Lakeside, you can see overall that the slope that they actually built to was lower than what our property tonight has to deal with. But you can see just kind of an example of what it looks like to have a fence or wall at that natural grade and then the actual property itself sloping upward. So this one is a little more of a creative way to work with the base flood elevation. So we've got the building in the front there, kind of on a mound, that parking underneath, because that doesn't have to meet any sort of base flood elevation since it's a non-habitable space. And then again, the structure in the rear is almost looks like it's floating a bit. And then it mitigates that streetscape view with the hedging in the front. So then here is another example. This one is still in the permitting process. But you can see that it does have fill, but to a somewhat lesser degree. And then it does slope down and mitigate for that base flood finished floor elevation towards the rear.
And some of the board was here when this was approved. And if you look, you can see this is the streetscape. And then we had them come in and show the streetscape with the fill. And you can see the fence line is 6 feet. So here's part of the issue, okay, is that if you have a rise over, what is it, 30 inches, Peter? You need a step for a safety rail. When do you need a safety rail? Come on, back up.
I'll just speak loud. Anytime you have a walking surface where there is a change in elevation of greater than 30 and 36 inches out, you must have a guard along that walking surface, or basically a handrail with pickets, so somebody can't walk and fall off and hurt themselves. So that anytime.
And how high does the handrail have to be, Peter?
The handrail in residential needs to be a minimum of 36 inches. So if you have a drop off of 30 and a 36-inch handrail, you're at 5'6".
So our maximum wall height on the side is 6 feet. So as you can see here, what they did here is that they sloped the fill to the retaining wall, and then they left enough retaining wall to meet the handrail requirement or the safety rail requirement so that somebody could walk there. So there is, and it's not shown clearly, but at permit, there will need to be a 36-inch difference between the top of the retaining wall and the bottom of the fill along it, the path that you can walk, so you can't fall over.
And water retention or water diversion.
So this also had, you all did this with the civil plan to deal with the water retention. The same condition that we proposed to carry forward was applied to this one, which was just recently heard. And this one came in again with fill much more, it was filled a lot higher and much squarer. They reduced the fill down. And they did some, I think they did some stem wall construction on this one, and then they sloped it down with a retaining wall. And then I think they're going to have to do like a detention area in either the rear or the front for this particular one because of the sloping to catch the water and detain it before to meet the city standards. So I haven't seen, I should have pulled the permit plans, but I didn't pull to see what the civil said. But I know they've been working with Giles at the city engineer's office.
And then here we have our last one, another one on South Lakeside. And actually, Erin, if you could go to the next slide, I think that shows it a little better. So this is kind of that side view. You can see the garage structure is much more forward on the property, and it's at a little lower. And then the house itself further into the property has 2 floors above an open area. So that area is not filled. And it meets the requirements for our base flood elevation, just kind of another creative way to work with our requirements here.
And on this one, the sides were kind of open. So the grade along the side was much lower. The fill was much lower along the sides of the property, and they would use that as storage underneath the structure. So it was almost kind of like an open storage on the sides.
Okay, so now getting back to historic design elements. Overall, staff analysis is that it's designed with elements of mid-century modern and is generally compatible with the district, excluding, of course, the issues with filler fencing. Yeah, obviously the height again is taller, but part of that is unavoidable. The flat roof shape is visually compatible with nearby structures as well as the style that they're emulating. The windows are balanced. The exterior finish is very common for the area. And it does have elements like the projecting eyebrows and stuff that are very common character defining features for that mid-century modern style. Awesome. So then we've got our additional guidelines for demolition as well, set out in our historic preservation ordinance. The remaining structure is non-contributing, and it's staff conclusion that the remaining structure is not of great interest and it will not result in a major loss of the city.
It's the garage that you guys,
Yeah.
this was gonna be the printed house, and they're gonna use that for storage. And then they're coming back and then they're gonna demolish it and put this.
Awesome. So our final note on design, staff concludes that this uses materials, form, and detailing that are consistent with a contemporary iteration of that mid-century modern style. And we do believe that it is in line with our requirements in the design guidelines. So in conclusion, staff does recommend approval with conditions except for the fill and fencing as proposed. And we recommend that you all discuss the proposed fill and ways to meet those base flood elevation requirements to determine if there is an alternative design that would be more compatible for the site development. And then on the next slides, we've just got the conditions of approval. The first 3 conditions that you've been provided address those issues of fencing, FEMA regulations, site drainage, all of that stuff. Awesome. And then I believe the applicant and their representative are here to speak tonight as well.
Did they have a PowerPoint?
Good evening. For the record, Wes Blackman, CWB Associates. I'm a urban planner, certified urban planner, AICP. And I am, I think, the applicant or project manager. I'm not sure what I'm called, but I'm here. And I'm employed by the owner of the property, which is LWB Development LLC. This is Eric Yenigan.
Hello.
And he is a neighbor. He lives just down the street at, what is your address?
924 South Lakeside.
924 South Lakeside. So he lives right next to Brendan Lynch. And we saw Brendan's house, 920 South Lakeside. So I'm pleased to represent him, and this has been an exciting project. We also have an audience, and they're available for questions. They may have something to add too. We have the architect, Tom Benedict, and Deborah Northsea, who is our landscape architect, and me. And I'm sparing you my own PowerPoint here, and I'm going to piggy off the staff's and just point out some things that I'd like to highlight here. First of all, we agree with staff findings. We agree with their recommendation that this should be approved. We do feel that this is something that can go forward and be worked out between this meeting and the building permit process. We understand there are serious issues at play here, and they're really universal when you're dealing with a waterfront property. And it is a literal moving target in terms of the base flood elevation and the changes that are represented there in the future. I'll touch more on the fence height issue later. But I'd like to tell you about the timing getting here, how we got to this meeting. And I think our pre-application meeting was in May on this project. Yeah, it was in May. And we were going to come for a conceptual review to the Historic Preservation Board. And we were prepared to do that. And there's an illustration here that I'm going to pass out that was actually part of the backup for the June meeting. And then we, as a group, a team, didn't feel that we were prepared for that meeting necessarily because our design was still in flux. And we we didn't show up at the June meeting and asked that it be continued later. Well, we didn't know that July and August would pass us by because of lack of a physical quorum because of the board's composition. And so then we came down to September and we thought a conceptual review before you would just be additional time and we could save time by submitting our full application, which we did in October. And then we were on the regular November meeting agenda, and then we had Nicole. So it's lucky that we're here. And just so you know that we've been in the system quite a while, and I wanted you to be aware of that. We have sent out notification for this project. Staff was kind enough to indicate that Judith Lee Hemstreet at 1111 South Lakeside was interested in this project. And I reached out to Judith. She was impacted by Hurricane Ian on the West Coast. She had property in Punta Gorda as well. So she's dealing with issues there. I sent her plans. Architectural plans, and along with a picture of a building that this building was fashioned from. And Tom Benedict, the architect, can talk more about that later, but that's in the 800 block of Atlantic Avenue, north of Ocean in Lantana. So you can see a smaller version of this building essentially in the real world if you were to drive by that location. But I did correspond with Judith. Her main concern was construction and just the interruption that causes. And I pointed out to her that that would be true of any project and that the likely path of coming and going from the property would be 12th Avenue South. And I didn't hear anything else from her. Did you? Okay. And then it is a small world. And Ken Brower happens to live next door. Ken is an architect. Ken and I have known each other for a very long time, almost scarily so. And we were also involved with the property to the south. This used to be a 150-foot wide property. And what you are seeing is the remnant of the building that was there. It was an Edgar Workman building at one time, and it was significantly modified and in the, I think, late 70s. And yeah. And so what is remaining, the theory was that it would be the construction trailer, a permanent construction trailer for the 3D printed house that would be built on the southern half of this property. The property was split into two 75-foot wide lots. So this is the northern lot of that 75-foot of the original 150-foot wide lot. And Ken Brower was the architect for the southern lot, and he is also the neighbor to the north. And Ken and I have had lunch, and we've also had a telephone conversation, and he's here today. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but just to summarize, he is concerned about his landscaping in what would be the southeast corner of his property. There's a large royal palm that it kind of breaches the property line. And I shared this concern with the owner, and they are very accommodating in terms of wall design or anything to protect that tree. Part of the staff recommendation or the staff report mentions Dave McGrew coming out to the property and wanting a tree survey. There is some landscaping material in the northeast corner of this property, and that backs up to the southeast corner of the property to the north. And
No, I'm afraid of either.
There's a bottle of water on
the other. No light, did the mic down?
and the water. I think water will do. Okay. So Ken's, whoops. Anyway, Ken's main concern is the wall. And as far as he's concerned, the wall could be 12 feet high between his property and this property. He realizes that that is not possible. We are limited to a 6-foot high wall because that is the natural grade according to the code. He also would like to see the house moved 1 foot further to the south so that the north wall of this house on this property is 1 foot further south from the northern property line. And the property owner has no problem in accommodating that desire. The setback, the minimum setback is 7.5 feet for this lot. We are now showing it at 9. So that would be a 10-foot setback from the north property line. Okay, the streetscape photo that the staff referenced really came before we had a good idea about how to treat the side property line. And looking at the streetscape photo, if you could use the one that had the red highlights showing the fence. I'd also like to pass an illustration out. If you can. Okay, this illustration shows the typical condition, and this would also be true for the property to the south. So, which just got an extension of its approval, and that's 1130 South Lakeside. This is 1120 South Lakeside. So this is a common condition. And what you see here is the wall that is limited to 6 feet in height from the natural, what is called the natural grade. And then you would have a planter and then a railing at least 3 feet high, as Peter Ringel explained, to protect people from tumbling off that distance between the top of the wall and the ground below to the north. But this condition would repeat itself on the south property line and the north property line of the adjacent property as well, given the proposed FEMA base flood elevation changes in this area. Now, I would like to read a portion of the code which is section, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds because I think this is something that we can deal with after the meeting, and the staff was okay with approving this, but they did make they took some time explaining the fence situation and so forth. So I want to go into it a little more with you. Section 23.4-4 fences, walls, and gates. Under D, single family and two family residential uses. Under height limitations. C, on the rear property line, not adjacent to an alley, and on that portion of the side property line from the rear. Okay, so the code says, the code really talks about the property line. It doesn't talk about the fence not on a property line. So we would argue that the fence height limitation would not apply in this case because it's not on the property line. You could have a fence in the interior of your yard away from the property line at any height, and it wouldn't have to necessarily be measured from what is the natural grade. I would also point out that natural grade, if we are going to an elevation of 11 or 8, suddenly that becomes the natural grade. And I would say that that would argue for a more sensitive approach in terms of code language that would address a new reality rather than trying to wed us to what is the old natural grade, which will soon be underwater, apparently. So the long and short of this is I think we can get through tonight. I think we can work through the details. I think the code does allow something like we are proposing here that is off the property line that would protect people from any hazard related to the higher wall. And we would have to meet the conditions of the civil engineer and engineering requirement that the stormwater be retained on the site. So.
So I think Wes is correct, is I think we just need to deal with his interpretation later because staff does not agree with that interpretation. And there's no provision for a fence. It's either a fence or it's structure. And if structure can be anything, it could be any type of something. So it's something that has a foundation and it's a structure. So if it's a structure, it has to meet setback. So it either meets setback or it's a fence. So the only exemption from the setback is for the fence. So it either meets the fence height or it's a structure and it has to be set back to the 7.5 feet. So if they're proposing to make it 9 feet, they could have that wall there and then they would have to talk to Peter if you could have a 7-foot planter. So that would be something to work out with the building official if that would meet the Florida building code to have a 7-foot 6-inch planter. Okay.
And I can report to being the planner involved with the 1120 South Lakeside property. That was a similar condition contained in that approval, was that everything had to meet the building code at the time of building permit submittal. So we were aware of that at that time, and there was the same condition on that property. So the board has approved this before with a similar condition. And at this time, we'll take any questions. And we have our design professionals here, the landscape architect and our architect here.
The structure that we are showing, I just want to make sure the board members that are here now they were not part of the approval 1130 South.
Right.
Side. And, the idea back then, because we went over backwards for the applicant was splitting the lot. The lot was 150 foot, 275s. We would normally require them to raise the entire property, the structures on the property. But we wanted to utilize the remaining structure on 1120 as a storage, like a construction trailer for building a 3D printed house on the right hand side that is not there, showing it is there. We went through recently, and we were going to have to deal with a couple issues having to do with rights of the property. That one only had, it goes up next to an easement that goes into the postal, which is 4th Avenue. So, but the I wanted to find out the building being built, being proposed is going to be on, it's going to be constructed on structural fill, and that is allowed at this moment, but may not in the future.
I would have to defer to the architect on that. What we're doing is the elevation is designed to meet the proposed map changes. So we are designing for the future. And if the future means that we cannot use structural fill, we cannot use structural fill. Yeah.
As it is right now.
No.
If I can just answer, I just confirm with Peter, if they build their entire structure and not a bit of it touches the VE zone of the current map, they could use structural fill as of now. But if one corner or anything touches the current map VE zone, now when the new map goes into effect, they are within the LIMWA, whether they are in a VE zone or an AE zone. So that's that triangular line you saw, and no structural fill is allowed in the LIMWA. So it doesn't matter if you're in an AE zone or a VE zone. You're done. So as proposed, and I don't know, it looks to us like they were proposing structural fill. So if they are using structural fill and the code changes, they would have to use a different type of construction that would meet the FEMA requirements at that time.
But that wouldn't necessarily impact the design that you were approving tonight.
And the agreement. One foot further south, is that moving the entire building? 1 foot, or are we narrowing the building?
This is built in their building.
Where,
So if the map changes, the
entire-
side of the project has to change.
there is some room on the south setback. If you look at the site plan, I believe the side setbacks are both 9 feet on the north and the south property line. So there is room to accommodate that foot. I think Tom Benedict could address that.
So, but to your point, Chip, I just was talking with Peter, and what your purview is if they had to redesign the structure and it's no longer on structural fill, we would have to evaluate it as staff to determine if it still met the intent of the original approval, and then determine if it would need to come back before you at that time, because it would impact, it would have to depend on how it appeared from the road. Because this would be a non-contributing new structure. So we're mostly concerned about compatibility, neighborhood compatibility, which is why you're concerned about how the grading and the fill works from the road forward and on the sides overall.
Could you bring back up the image of the showing the red line around? Yes, that one. So in effect, what?
Sorry, this is not cooperating this evening. There we go.
In effect, the box on the left, the point of the fence or wall or whatever that is up above that, the base wall, that is not going to be allowed. In other words,
So none of this fence here and none of this gate fence here on the side is allowed. So none of this could exist because it's either a structure or it's a fence. So they could have a fence if they set the fence back 7.5 feet from the property line. And we could consider it a structure. If it's a fence, it has a from natural grade of 6 feet. So typically what we've seen when we did our site visits is that people have used landscaping when they have to raise for privacy in lieu of a fence, is what the application has been and what we've seen.
From the proposed construction, that side fence, the privacy fence is going to be about 30 inches high, is that right?
So
Their privacy fence right there.
this one,
Yeah, will we
so
would
this,
only be allowed to be about 30 inches high above the fill that they bring in.
so that fence has to be 36 inches high, above the fill grade per the building code,
At least
because
36 inches high.
yes.
Okay, but then they cannot exceed 6 feet above
The
the
total height from the fill, from the natural grade, not the fill grade, the natural grade. And it's the same on this one too. Like this is fill on it. So it'd be from the natural grade is 6 feet. So this is,
Existing what's there now.
yeah, the original natural grade. Yes.
How do they deal? We had a situation, this board heard an issue with a property a little further to the north where they had a wall approved or a fence, a block wall fence approved for their house, and the actual natural grade went down into a swale.
Mhm.
Towards
It
the
goes
coast.
down, then the wall goes down.
Well, I mean, but they were approved to have their wall nice and symmetrical.
So you would typically, that would be processed for a variance. One of the things we're going to continue to look at too, because I'm
But
looking.
what I was getting at is they brought in fill
Mhm,
in other words, the neighboring property had a problem with that.
mhm.
Okay, and then they brought in a bunch of fill to bring in.
Exactly.
And, okay, so now it no longer, the fence does not protrude any higher than 6 feet above the existing grade that's there now. It is not the natural grade because there's a very large swale.
Yeah, I know that we were working to resolve that,
It's
and
still, that's still.
it's been resolved.
Oh, it is totally resolved.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and they're able to keep their wall there, right?
It's a longer story that's not on this topic, so we can,
But that's what I'm
Pin
saying
it.
is that we are going to be coming, this board is going to be looking at these, at things such as this situation. And in other words, if you were to take a look at the grade between the two houses, let's just say that hypothetically, both of these structures are built. And so the grade between the two structures at some point is going to be, if they wanted a privacy fence between them and they wanted to add this at a later time, okay, could they come back to the city and say, okay, we're proposing a fence. Here's our grade now. We want to be a 6-foot fence in between the two structures.
so that would require a variance because it's from the natural grade and fill is not a natural grade. So if they come back in and want to add a privacy fence, they need to request a variance. This is what our code allows. If in the future that changes because there's this concept that if you're coming in and filling, but keep in mind, so there aren't that many intercoastal properties in the city that don't have a house on them or that, so these are unique circumstances within the city. There's a lot more in South Palm Park of folks who are adjacent to other people. And if you start filling and then doing fences, you could really dramatically change the impact of neighbor to neighbor within the rest of South Palm Park. So we have been very hesitant to change our code because the impacts could be very much unforeseen. And so one of the things we like to do over the next year to 2 years is get some grant money, get a study, look at some typologies of raising structures, because that might be required FEMA down the road for historic adaptation, look at some of our other things. We've had the pandemic, and then we all of our staff got recruited for more money, so we're in a rebuilding. So that's the plan, is to come up with a plan, but that is a very delicate plan. So it needs to go slow.
Many of us have gone to 8 places. I could say the Keys, the West Coast, Sanibel, areas like that, where they are, I don't know if they drastically raised, in other words, I don't know if they got out in front of FEMA and they raised and said, okay, your minimum height of the beam is going to be 10 feet above.
No. They had higher stuff already. And then the Keys is its own special universe. I mean, some of their stuff is NAVD 14 plus 1 or 2. So they're 16 feet above and their natural grade is lower. The Keys is a whole other circumstance. So
Are we looking at eventually going to something like that where the actual base?
Right. But in the Keys, they don't allow fill. And so that's the other thing that's happening. And in a lot of places, they don't allow fill. And so what they do is they require basically the adaptation is to allow the natural grade to remain the natural grade. And then they raise the structure and then they utilize the structure either for parking, which is non-habitable, or they program the bot underneath of the structure for like a patio area or something like that that is non-habitable. So fill doesn't necessarily have to be part of our future. It's not prohibited now, it's allowed now.
That's what
So
I'm saying. I'll be gravitating eventually toward designs because that design typically doesn't look like the rest of South Palm Park or anything else just about in Lake Forest. But I mean, are we gravitating toward having something like that?
the design of what? I'm not sure.
The design of raising houses and not allowing any fill.
So that is a very big discussion. That is a public policy discussion that is down the road and would require, and that's part of why we want to look at some grant funding and some typology and some other things to have happen.
Yeah, well, I think that the fence is one issue, but I think we're kind of touching on the fact that there's a larger issue here that as far as dealing with the floodplain and the fill and what the impacts are of filling this property, and then what are the impacts of several properties being filled. And so that was some of the questions I had for Mr. Ringel as far as, if this new floodplain map gets adopted, then you're not allowed to build on structural fill. What is the reasoning behind that? And as it's allowed now, what are the potential impacts we have with putting fill into a property and having displacement into other properties because water no longer has somewhere to go?
Peter Ringel, you have a couple questions there, so I'll kind of answer them one at a time.
Yeah.
The whole purpose behind the limited moderate wave action or the LIMWAT and the VE zone is you have waves and you have scour. So whenever you place structure on fill or have a shallow foundation and you have wave action, you're going to get significant damage done to these properties, as you can see from what happened over on the West Coast after the last storm in Hurricane Sandy and all the storms. It's the water that did all the damage, not the wind. Okay. So for your first question, that's the reason behind the no fill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I forgot to take notes for the second question.
The second question basically is what the potential impacts are of having this property or multiple properties filled and displacement of water.
So if you look at the way the east coast of Florida differs from the west coast of Florida, you have a gigantic basin in the Gulf, and that's why you get the greater storm surge. Okay, if you look at our topography here in Palm Beach County, you have the intercoastal, you have the inlets, and you have the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to be very hard to get a significant storm surge in these areas. So by bringing fill in these little parts, on these houses, to say there's going to be an adverse impact where it's going to raise the flood level more than 1 foot on any of these lots, I don't see this little, even filling an area the size of this parking lot is going to raise the intercoastal a foot. Mm-hmm. So right now, the FEMA's trying to, through regulation, limit damage. And that's the whole reason behind the higher standards and bringing the maps up, is to prevent damage. Because as you see, the newer structures perform so much better than the older ones.
Right. Okay.
In the particular area that this is being proposed, 12th Avenue South is used as sheet runoff for flooding. All flood water, rainwater runs to the intercoastal.
Correct.
And that, these properties would have negated that anyway, because the water would have to go around in any case to 12th Avenue. But with some of the other areas, that's where that sheet runoff, it all goes into the intercoastal. Are any of these modifications that we're making and raising that, is that going to change that sheet runoff that we have right now?
I am not a stormwater engineer. I'm a building official, but what I can say is this. The South Lakeside Drive, the average of South Lakeside Drive is 5-6 feet above sea level, NAVD. Okay, your king tide is 3. So, as we noticed at the last storm, you had the Gulf Stream Lake by, at the end of the intercoastal bridge. There's nowhere for the water to go when you have king tide and a little bit of storm surge or a little bit of rain. You're going to have problems with drainage. What you have to be very careful about doing is all these properties along South Lakeside Drive, putting in fill and changing the natural drainage. And that's something that will have to be looked at, but as more of a policy stormwater management than a building.
I live one block west of this and for 35 years, and just recently have had several incidences of heavy rains flooding my backyard where it's never flooded before. And actually one of them, as I looked out my side window in between my house and the next house, it looked like there was rapid moving going from west to east. And it was really, really bad. And I am very concerned about that.
And some of what's happening is we have experienced sea level rise. And so what happened is a lot of our system is a gravity system, and then there's a flap. And so in order to prevent saltwater intrusion back into the neighborhood, the city has installed flaps. So what happens is when the sea level rise, or when the tide comes up, the flap goes down to prevent the tide water from coming into the stormwater system and then adding to the flood. But when the flap's down, then the system doesn't drain either. So it has to wait until the tide reduces to drain the system. So it's good because we're protected from inundation, which is a big problem because you don't want salt water in your house. But there are issues with that. It's a very complex system, and we can have the city engineer out if you guys want to talk more in depth about it. But there's a lot of things in play. And I know there was an issue also with the FDOT stormwater system that FDOT is supposed to be working on South Federal Highway. I don't know if that's resolved or not, but we could get an update from Giles. But that's all of that is it's very complex. So it is on the city's agenda. We on our radar, and we do need to look at it in a more systematic way. And we are part of the Southeast Compact for Climate Change. And we did a vulnerability analysis and looked at some of where we're going to be most impacted from future sea level rise as well. So we have that initial data, and then we just need to start looking at some of that data and how does it apply and what will our policies become as a result of the data that's been generated.
And when you look at the streetscape for the proposed property, and you see Mr. Brower's house right next to it, that same thing comes into play. Is water going to, you're pretty flat in there, right, Ken? I mean, it's gonna have water in the street's gonna be running down. It will be actually dammed up by these two properties, and won't be able to get through the intercoastal from 12th Avenue down to Ken's house or South Palm Park, where that's a sheet runoff in there. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. They have to build up above that grade. I don't know that there's additional drainage mitigation that can be done for the properties to the west of that. We won't see that.
Well, I know that if we do say fill and drainage shall be reviewed at permit by the city engineer and the Department of Community Sustainability for all applicable drainage and fill requirements, including that no drainage is allowed to impact or flow onto adjacent property. So at least whatever the historic drainage was, they have to manage the historic drainage for, what is it, a 3-year, 24-hour storm, Peter? It's like a...
I know it's Peter Ringel, it is the 25-year storm they have to design to, but I do not know more than that.
So, and we'll set them up to work with Giles in the for the stormwater plan. And if they need to, they might have to do one of the things that we suggested for the other property. Let me go through this one here was and I've seen this application as well, is that if there is historic drainage, that they're going to have to manage is in some places on the West Coast, they've basically built a landscape area that's a wet, dry detention pond functionally, and it has landscaping in it. So it looks like a natural landscaped, but it's a shallow kind of ditch that has plants that work either submerged or, that can be wet for a little bit. And it becomes part of the, so that maybe that adaptation might be recommended by the city engineer if they don't, because it is a big house. I mean, this is a 6,000 square foot house. So they're taking up a lot of room on the lot. So they might have to do something a little more creative to make sure they're keeping all the water they're supposed to be keeping, managing it. So that is something they'll have to work out with the city engineer.
I'd like to take this opportunity just to clear up some information here that might be faulty. On-site drainage, section 18-103. This was an ordinance adopted in 2020. Says prior to the issuance of the building permit for construction on property, a site drainage plan and drainage computation should be submitted for approval by the director or designee. The drainage plan must indicate facilities which will totally contain on-site a 3-year, 1-hour storm event.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. And then we do have a chicken or the egg issue with the shared property line. And you do have an approval on the books for 1130 right now. It would make sense if Phil is being brought into this area that it both be done at the same time and that common property line be addressed at that time. And looking at the survey, just correcting staff a little bit, I don't want to split hairs, but if you look at the survey that was included in the application, the elevation of the property is between 4 and 4.5 feet, the predominant elevation, and it's not 3 feet. So just wanted to clarify that. And then we have Tom Benedict, the architect, to answer the setback question.
Just a quick note. There was a discussion about the shift of the home, perhaps 1 foot to the south to honor the additional setback requirement from the neighbor to the north. And no objection to that. Our setbacks, of course, are larger on both the south and the north than what is required by code. What's interesting is the house was crafted in such a way that we did the larger setbacks. You have a wedding cake as the building goes up, the setback increases. So right now, the house is meeting the criteria for the height of the building based on the setback from the side yard. So if I shift the house over 1 foot, that doesn't hurt the setback on the north, but I just invaded the high roof setback on the south. Because right now it's tailored exactly to meet not only the side setbacks as it sits at grade, but also as it's required. As you go up vertically, there's additional setback required. So that would actually crush what we've already considered to be kind of the perfect scenario. So perhaps we can work that out. Maybe I can slice through the building and remove a foot, but that's a considerable.
It's a step back. It's a step back on the south side. They'll have to be moved back a little bit further.
I don't have space on the south right now. I'm good. It looks like if you're looking at the plan on the site, I have a 9 foot setback, 7.5 required. I could push it over, and that's not a problem. It's what's happening at the required setback of the height of the building.
There's a wall height setback. And so they have an increased setback so they could have, it's like a maximum wall height. And then as you bring in your building, that a wall height setback goes up. And so staff did not make the recommendation for the 1 foot. That came from a resident who made that recommendation. So what if you all made that recommendation, they would have to lower the wall height because this application does not include a variance to the wall height at side setback.
And that's the lower portion. That's not the step back portion. You're coming up and you're stepping back and then going up to the second floor on both the north. and
Right, so
south
that
side.
the setback we are exactly on the setback at the high roof
At that height.
on the south side. So if we push the ground floor is not jeopardized, but the upper floor is. So if we push the building over a foot, all of a sudden I've invaded that envelope by 1 foot, and I'd either have to reduce the structural enclosure or lower it. I can't lower it because it's a ceiling height issue. So I'd have to remove area from the design of the floor plan.
And the owner who is representing tonight for the property owner is okay with that change on the second floor if it alters the height of the south elevation.
Will that bring in any issues because of symmetry of windows or things like that? I mean, that's what the architect is going to work out.
So
Yeah.
if I can I just understand, because we can't approve something, we can't condition something that's going to make it non-conforming with the zoning code. So if you move it south a foot, what you're saying is that it no longer meets the wall height at side setback. So you as the applicant are agreeing to reduce the height of your structure at the side setback or not?
We're going to reduce the width of the house at the second floor.
And so you're going to move the second floor in.
Correct.
Okay, I got it now. I'm like, what? All right, excellent. Thank you.
So that I understand it, the upstairs will be on the south side, will be actually moved in
A foot.
a foot. So you're gonna be losing some square footage.
Correct.
And that can be approved. I mean, that can go.
Yes, as long as they understand what the impact is and they're agreeing to the resident's request.
And then because that may affect the symmetry of the windows, the things like that. Is there anything that's going to cause that to have to come back in front of the board?
Because of the window symmetry will really be impacting mostly on that side elevation. Let me pull up a little front elevation. You know, maybe that'll scoot the far right windows on the second story a little in, but it shouldn't be a big enough impact that we'd have to come back to you all.
It's just the second story.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all I got. Do we have a side topography like we did on Nestor's house where it shows front to back? I think we did on this one, right?
Looking at grade or you
Grade, yeah, how it meets
got a grade shot?
Should we get?
how it meets Lakeside Drive and the intercoastal.
Right.
No, we have our side elevations, but it's not so much of a grade shot.
Is there any requirement for maximum slope from the back going down to the intercoastal or?
Is there a safety requirement for slope of fill?
No.
Fill is a 2-in-1. For every 1 foot down, you need to go 2 foot over in order for sand to be stable. So for every 1 foot of elevation, you need 2 feet of slope
And that's
in order for
something,
it to stay in place.
that's something that will be reviewed at permitting.
Yes, Peter Ringel, at time of building permit, all of the grade, they'll have to have a grading plan, a drainage plan, and it will be reviewed at time of permitting prior to permit issuance.
Okay.
Well, they have to meet the code with the fence.
We're-
So, and the fencing's not subject. So you just really, is it a discussion of, do you want to see it sloped? Would you rather see it terraced? Would you rather, what are you hoping to see? Because they're going to have to, even with the alternate drawing here. So it's either a fence or it's a structure. So if it's a fence, it's 6 feet from natural grade. If it's a structure, it has to meet setback.
And-
So
And the board doesn't really review fences.
the board does not review fences, but you could say, for example, here, like if they wanted to terrace it, you know, they could do this a little bit lower, you know, and maybe not, maybe do their foundation a little deeper. And then they could, there's some other things that they could work out with the architect and the building official and staff. So if the fence is at the 7.5 foot setback, because it's 10% of the lot width, right? Then they would, then they could, if they have the guardrail that's 36 in height, they could have a drop and fill down, and they could terrace it down. They could slope it down from the wall, or they could just drop it down. I mean, like, could they drop? They could. Well, it has.
Something that we need that.
Well, you have to keep the rainwater on the property. So there's.
Yeah, so you still have to meet drainage. I mean, this is the problem is it's like, so it's just really about the aesthetic for you is like, are you okay with either sloping or terracing on the side? Because they're going to have to bring the sides down. It's not working the way that it's working. So, so some of this, it's not going to meet code, and there's some other drainage issues they're going to have to take care of on the backside. So are you okay with staff making all those decisions about appearance? Are you like, hey, we'd rather see it terraced in a more formal way if possible, or would you rather see it sloped like what was done on Nestor's property?
I think it's something.
That's why saying it has to be terraced or sloped or whatever, but I want to that. So I would more slope, but so terracing.
Okay.
Terrace, landscape, whatever, it still has to go through staff, deal with all that water runoff through people and engineers.
So if you're good with punting it to staff, the condition of approval is already embedded in the development order to have staff review the drainage and then to require the fence to meet the code. So all of that can be managed by staff on the back end. So if you're understanding, then basically what in your discussion, then if you agree, you would be providing direction to the applicant to comply with the code and then to work to lower and slope the fills on the sides and minimize the fill as much as possible is what it sounds like I'm hearing.
Well, and realistically, wouldn't that be in the codes and or conditions of what we're talking about?
It is in the condition of approval, but it's a discussion you all need to have for compatibility. And if you agree with staff's condition and you want to provide any additional direction to the applicant, this is your time to do that.
And we appreciate this discussion. I was hesitant to bring up the fence because I knew it would consume a lot of time, but this will be dealt with at the building permit level. We will not get a building permit and not be able to put anything in the ground if we don't meet this requirement.
I believe there's some people here that want to speak.
I have one public comment, and this is from Jimmy Kelly Sr. at 1202 South Lakeside Drive. And he said the demolition of the existing building at the site should include means to keep dust and debris from spreading to surrounding properties. This can be done by spraying water on the material. When 1130 South Lakeside was demolished, it blew all over the neighborhood, and a complaint to the city stopped it until water was used. Any water on 1120 due to rain or coastal flooding should not flow onto surrounding properties. The existing neighbor has poor drainage. Several houses now have water spilling into crawl spaces and garages during the heavy rains. The 12th Avenue 30-inch outfall flow is reduced to 10 inches diameter by barnacles for the last 100 feet based on video measurements 20 years ago. The 12th Avenue storm outfall is also poor because of sand filling the storm pipe drainage at the lake at high tide. Raising the level of 1120 of the 1120 property and the large footprint of the building will make flooding worse unless some design method is used to prevent spillage into the neighborhood and street. Consider a cistern. If a seawall is included in the plans, it should not cause erosion of surrounding shorelines, and the wall height should include predicted future global warming water levels. Recent high tides are so high that brackish water is killing trees and plants. Mangroves should be considered along the water line.
Come on up, state your name. Who you are, where do you live?
Okay. I'm Ken Brower and I live at 1100 South Lakeside, next door, a little tiny house, what it'll be. And as Wes said, I'm the architect for 1130, the house that be to the south of this property. And the owner, well, I've spoken with Wes and I've spoken with Eric, a couple of times, and they all seem to be extremely accommodating to questions or concerns that we have. However, I want to, one of the things that really concerns me, one of the things that concerns me most is that we have these, as was mentioned, landscaping that's right at the property line. These are, 40 or 50-foot royal palm trees. And they were there when we bought the place. And my concern, of course, is that if a wall winds up getting built there, that the footer could impact the health of the tree or perhaps even the survival of the tree. I don't know. I'm not a landscape architect, and I don't know for sure what kind of impact it would have on a tree if a wall was built there. But it seems like maybe a wall's been discussed. I'm not crystal clear on what the ultimate plan would show as far as a wall or a fence or what's going to happen between us. So I'd like to understand that. And while I understand staff's position very much about and the board's position about taking some of these issues and letting staff deal with it before it's permitted, but during permitting, what it does do is, and perhaps not just in this case, but it takes away the public's ability to comment on those final solutions. And as I said, I'm very comfortable with the owner, their approach, and of course, Wes Blackman, that it'll work out fine for us. I would, however, since there's not going to be any public, additional public comment on it, if that's the way it goes, get the assurance from the owner, perhaps from Mr. Blackman, that I might be able to participate to some extent in the process of that, those discussions at permitting that deal with my particular issue. In addition to that, it's perhaps a question for staff instead of you, I'm not sure, but I think Chip kind of touched on it. If there's a wall built on the south side of this property and my client wants to put a wall on the north side of his property, how's that going to work? Or is that one of those things that you're just not sure how it's going to work out yet?
You're speaking about the variance you're talking about.
When are we talking about? So,
Oh.
okay, so all walls and fences, if they are walls and fences and not structures, which are between the property line and the setback, if it's a wall or a fence, has to be measured in height from the natural grade. That is the code.
Okay.
If you fill, that is not the natural grade.
Okay.
So everything is measured from the natural grade.
Okay.
Now, if you want to have a fence on top of your fill, that fence will need to be set back to the property setback line.
That's not what I'm hearing.
Okay.
If both owners have a wall, I presume they can't touch each other, I presume.
Mhm.
And so.
Well, typically there's not like one person does a wall or another person does a wall. It's not both people doing a wall. Now, if there's a retaining wall, it would probably, if you had a retaining wall on one side and then basically the other property also required a retaining wall, how would you do that?
Well,
That's a really, can we talk about that after? Because that's a very specific
Yeah.
building question about how that would work. And it's not really it's not germane to this approval in the sense. We can figure that out.
Okay, as long as it's not germane, because if I don't know for sure if there's a wall going on the south property line of this or not. And if there is, it may be germane to my client and this client to make sure that gets figured out. It may not be an issue for the board from an
Mhm.
aesthetic standpoint, but it certainly could be an issue for both.
So if you had two retaining walls, each abutting the property line, you could still build a retaining wall on your property line. Just the walls would touch at the property line. So if you're building a retaining wall on a property line and the other guy's building a retaining wall, they're going to be right next to each other. So there's going to be nothing in the middle.
They can touch.
They can touch. It's okay. They can be friends. They'll be friendly walls.
Okay. Well, except typically retaining walls cantilever footer, and so it may not retain from the, I don't know.
Either way,
We can figure it out. You know, we can
No unbalanced fill, so it. Peter Ringel, there's no unbalanced fill, so it no longer is a retaining. When you have fill on both sides.
if they're still on this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have.
And we need to kind of, I mean, we're not really supposed to do questions and answers in public. We did a little bit more because he's the neighbor, but we need to kind of keep this to 3
Yes,
minutes,
ma'am.
like.
Hi, I'm Greg Richter. I live across the street from this project, so I'm a neighbor too. I'm also president of the homeowner association, of the neighborhood association, South Palm Park. So Greg Richter, 1202 South Palm Way, back of my property, it's at the corner of 12th and Lakeside. I'm not opposed to this project at this point because of where we are and what we have done in these type of developments on Lakeside. Should have spoke up at the one that came beforehand, because you've already approved it. So there's no reason why you wouldn't, you can't work out something. But neighborhood compatibility, no. This project between the two houses is not compatible with what the neighborhood had before. You had a 4,000 square foot house on a 150-foot lot. Now between the two, you're going to have almost 13,000 square feet of building on this lot. So, my biggest concern is going to be the runoff, because that's the third worst spot in South Palm Park. 18th, we all know about. We've got state coming in on that. 17th has got some real problems, but 12th and even between 11th and 10th, we have really bad flooding problems where we've had it breach the sanitary sewer, and we've had sanitary water, breaching the neighbor's house. And the last thing I got to say, again, this goes back to the neighborhood compatibility. Go look at the pictures. The front door, the bottom of the front door will be at the top, will be at the roof of the two next door houses. So, and finally, I know I followed when Brendan was doing his at 921. The big concern was, that second story, how high it was going to be, and here we got 2 stories on both of these properties. So again, not opposed to what we've done here. This is something, just keep this in mind as you go forward, as we do these things. These are some of the things we got to really think through. And I'm remiss at at the first one. So thank you all very much. Again, all of these discussions that we're talking about that are, and like Ken said, this is all going to be done at staff level and through permitting and everything else. And my concern is, if they decide to terrace it or slope it to one side or the other, how does that change the actual visual look for the neighborhood? I mean, the streetscape is what we're looking at. And, so, I don't think anybody has any problem with the design of the house. Nobody mentioned that at all. So the
But
house
it's set back so much. How far is it off? Like
60.
60 feet. So you're back farther than most on the block, I believe. But it's still up here.
yeah.
So I think what you can give, if you want to, because if you want to have staff address it, I think the direction you could give is to minimize fill and to slope the fill as low as possible from the front property line to where, to really limit the fill insofar as feasible, so that it has as least amount of fill as possible. For example, you can build the fill up by the driveway and you can slope it down lower. So the fill can go up for the garage. It doesn't have to be so high among the whole front lot line. You can a softer transition of fill for sure. So that can be something that we can work out. If you are uncomfortable or if you are concerned and you would like the public to have another bite at the apple, one of the things that you did is you continued just the portion, or you could grant an approval and say, we just want to see this part come back as informational for public comment. Is there, do you have any suggestions, Elizabeth, like if they wanted to bring it back, or just, could they say that just the fill portion should come back, not because I don't want to bring the whole house back.
That's fine.
That delay their process.
So are you guys ready to go for permit?
Essentially.
Okay, so we would still have to work out the fill and the lot because that hasn't been worked out. So you come in for permit, we would review your drawings because this drawing that you submitted is not okay. It's not going to work, your alternative. So, there's still some work to do with staff on the back end based on this direction. Right. So what you could do is we could say prior to the issuance of the building permit that if you wanted another bite at the apple, you could continue just the fill part to come back. Or you could just say you want to direct staff to minimize fill and to have a more gentle slope, or insofar as feasible, on the front and on the sides. So it just depends on how you all want to handle this.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Wes. Wes may want to have a thought about this as well.
From the property owner's point of view, what they would like to do is treat this as an informational item and engage the public. And there could still be some give and take, but we would like the surety of leaving with something tonight, that we don't have a condition that we have to meet in the future for something.
Wes, we have another meeting in December for historic. We could just, if you all wanted to approve the item tonight, they could bring back for informational purposes and share and maybe giving some guidance from the board. I think you all could bring back as like a conceptual item in 2 weeks. Would you have?
And at the beginning, there was a reason why I went through the litany of delays, because we were going to present a conceptual program, but because we were delayed, we were rushed to the altar. So here we are at the wedding.
It's next week. It's actually next week because we flip-flop them. You guys are back next week. Could you guys bring something? Maybe we could have a few discussions. You could do something next Wednesday for.
And this would be for informational purposes.
Yes, it would be conceptual for if they're okay with it, but you all would have to be okay with approving and then coming back for information, or you would just continue the item.
A lot of what we're discussing that is going to happen at staff level and through permitting and have to be agreed to by the city engineer. The only reason that I would want to hear it is if it really changed the look of the house from the street.
So if that's your concern, we can address that with a condition of approval. So what we could say is, should the change in the grading significantly alter, the architecture of the house or the appearance of the structure from the street, that item would, and honestly, that's kind of built into the development order, because if something is significantly alters the front, we're going to say, hey, this is a bridge too far. We're not comfortable with this. You all need to come back.
And upon second thought, the owner does agree with that approach, having it as a condition. And then if there is an aesthetic change or something that would alter the certificate of appropriateness or affect the appropriateness of the architecture of the house, then it would be time for you to see it again. But, we're not keeping anything from you, and we can inform you in staff of what's going on.
I think as far as I don't want to put words on it, I was either, but I think since we'd like to see what staff is working. So I don't see back if there's follow-up month or two down the line when you guys have come to the decision. It's information only. Even if it's next week's process. Even staff just get a presentation to say this is what we worked out, and we kind of see, okay, that worked for us, or we might
Mhm.
As long as it doesn't delay what you guys are trying to do.
So then if you did, then I would say also include if you're going to make a motion in that, then just include your direction to them to engage the sloping. Because that's, to provide a more gentle slope or to reduce fill insofar as feasible. Okay?
Yeah, we don't, from these renderings, we can't see that slope away from the driveways and things like that you're mentioning, how they could, or the side view, show that it kind of slopes gradually from the road and then goes up a little bit toward the end. And that could affect the appearance of it, but I don't know that I don't see anything that's going to stop. If we agree to the concept of the size of the house, the height of the house, the windows and everything else, I don't see there's any reason that we'd have to.
No, I think if we can say that softer transition of fill would be better than terrace, I think that maybe we do agree on that.
Okay, so then if somebody is going to make a motion, then that motion would include that board direction to soften the transition of fill and reduce it and as insofar as feasible.
I move to approve HRPB project number 22-001-00370 with staff recommended conditions for the demolition of the existing structure and construction of a new 6,145 square foot single-family residence located at 1120 South Lakeside Drive based upon competent substantial evidence in the staff report and pursuant to the City of Lake Worth Beach land development regulations and historic preservation requirements to include the conditions
To include the board direction related to the transition of the transition of fill, the softening the transition of fill, and the board direction to bring back an informational update at a subsequent meeting.
I'll add that to my motion.
All right, we have a motion in a second. Aye.
Aye. No,
Oh, yeah.
it's included.
2 and 1.
We've got a two for. Getting very emotional.
I meant for the
All right, thank you very much. Congratulations and good luck on the project.
All right, we're going to take a short recess of 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
we're back.
All right.
That was the shortest recess I think we've ever had.
Keep everybody happy. All right, so we're on item HRPB project number 22-001-00321. Consideration of a certificate of appropriateness for construction of a new 4,135 square foot single family structure with sustainable bonus program incentive request for additional FAR for 324 North K Street. Subject property is located in multifamily residential and zoning district and is non-contributing property in the Northeast Lucerne Local Historic District. Future land use is medium density. And my understanding is that we are looking at a continuance for this.
Yes, but the city attorney just informed me that because there is a person here who is taking a quick break, that everybody has to vote if they're here unless they have a conflict of interest. So we are going to have to take that break.
Okay.
So
The next one? Oh, no. Okay.
no, because we can't vote.
Mhm.
Snuff it out.
Yep.
I believe there was a motion. Mr. Chairman, you were calling for a motion on the item to continue the item.
I move we continue item number 22-001-00321 to a subsequent meeting to be determined.
To the January HRPB meeting.
The January HRPD meeting.
Yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Unanimous. Okay,
Okay.
so let's move on to item D, HRPB project number 22-015-00005, a request for a variance to allow a generator in the front yard along South M Street for the property located at 504 3rd Avenue South. Subject property is a non-contributing resource within the Southeast Lucerne Local Historic District and is located in the multifamily residential zoning district. Future land use designation is medium density residential.
Awesome. So again, this is Annie Greening, Senior Preservation Planner with the Planning, Zoning and Historic Preservation Division. So like our chair said, we're talking about a variance now for a generator at an assisted living facility. Aaron, if you could go to the next slide. So our property here is on the northwest corner of 3rd Avenue South and South M Street. And next slide. Awesome. So this is just a bit of background on the project and the requirements that are at play here. So back in 2018, SB 7028 ratified rule of the Florida Administrative Code, which requires permanent emergency generators for assisted living facilities. And it also established certain requirements and standards for those generators. So then back in April of 2019, the property owner did submit a permit to install a generator and meet those new requirements. The permit was disapproved for a variety of reasons, and the property owner chose to cancel the permit in January of this year. In May, this property got cited for multiple fire code violations, which included the failure to comply with that generator requirement. Staff received an application for a variance to install that generator in the front yard of the property back in August. Took some time for it to get complete, but it has now been scheduled for this meeting. So this is the site plan that the applicant provided, and it shows those two red squares are their two preferred locations for the generator. Both are in the legal front yard of the property, which is typically the short side of the property. So in this case, even though the building doesn't face onto South M Street, the front of the property is towards South M Street. And then the next slide, we've got a couple photos just looking at it from looking northwest. That's that first one. And the second one is looking west at that front yard from South M Street. So that second photo kind of shows behind the hedges where these would be.
Like, oh, here.
Yes. Yep.
And they'll put a hedge in the front of that fence.
Yeah,
As required.
there's also some, and Annie will get into it. There's a bunch of landscape conditions on this. There are some missing and dead vegetation. And there's also a condition of approval to repave or install pavers to reestablish the walking path. So this is a door here, an exterior door, and then the walking path is no longer established to the exit here. And
Where's the door again?
right here.
Right.
So staff concurs with the applicants. I'm sorry, Annie.
Is that an emergency exit?
It is I don't know, they're all emergency exits. Do you know what I mean? It is not an ADA compliant exit.
You show the main entrance is there.
And then the ADA access is I believe is on the rear. But staff concurs with the applicant's proposed generator location of number 2.
They need generator.
Well,
That's correct.
yes.
Seen it on TV.
Yeah. Yep.
Is there an option?
So we'll go into that.
Well, let's wrap it up. Hold on. Let's let Annie wrap it up.
So the whole reason we're here for this variance is because the proposed locations in that front yard are in conflict with our LDRs. Our LDRs allow them in the side or the rear, not the front. So next we kind of go through the for requirements for variance requests. I think most of you were here the last time we heard a variance.
Yeah.
So we're going through them again. So for A, like we all said, these assisted living facilities must have an emergency generator. That's non-negotiable. There are limited locations for this generator that staff and the applicant have talked through due to the size and the siting of the existing structure. So the rear yard isn't really large enough to fit the size of a commercial generator that they require. The side yard is currently used as a residence outdoor space, and it's also adjacent to a single family home. So staff was concerned about cutting down on the resident space that they do have, and also any sort of impacts of noise or anything onto that adjacent home for that side yard.
That side yard is the assisted living facilities residence's only outdoor space.
No, it's not that big. So for B, staff does conclude that strict application of the LDRs would deny reasonable use of the property as it currently is used for an assisted living facility. It's been that way for over 60 years. And like we talked about, the front yard locations are adjacent to the building, which is great, but they are also away from adjacent homes or recreation areas. And that front yard location would allow for improvement of the site, including that walking path reconstruction that we mentioned. So for requirement C, we do believe that it's the minimum necessary to accommodate the required generator because, like we talked about, we believe that those front yard locations are the most suitable. And then finally, for D, the variance request per staff belief shall not be unduly injurious to nearby property. We have added conditions of approval, including screening of the generator and noise restrictions to limit their impact on any nearby properties. So staff has made positive findings for all 4 of the variance criteria, and we recommend that you all discuss the appropriateness of the proposed locations, determine if it is consistent with the requirements. And we've got our conditions of approval. Like I said, they include screening, noise limitations, as well as requiring that they resolve existing violations of the landscape code, such as that missing hedge there on the
Right.
fencing.
Well, they've been there for 60 years and we've had a lot of stuff happen around them. They're not very noisy neighbors. I don't see an issue granting a variance on that personally.
It seems to be the only spot because
Yes.
even though it's called a front yard, it's not really the front of the building. So it's logically
Yeah.
the only spot.
And the generator's not running all the time. It's only during an emergency.
It's the
Right.
emergency.
Well, they do testing. It's probably
Well, yeah,
set upon
yeah.
testing.
5 minutes.
But there doesn't seem to be any other
I do have a,
But
seems
I have
that
a little bit of,
logical.
I
yeah.
have a little bit of a problem. They depict the generator in those 2 locations as being kind of small and square.
Mhm.
The size of the generator for this particular facility is going to have to be huge.
Like a Volkswagen. Right.
Volkswagen bus.
Yeah.
It's not going to be quite that big. They have a temporary generator on site. It fits on the back of a smaller trailer. So, so it will be significant in size, but it will not be, as big as a bus. It will be, it'll be more like you
2
know,
refrigerators on side by side are laying on their side.
I think a car, but probably not as big as a car, but maybe like a Cinquecento, you know, like a Fiat 500 with not so tall, you know, like, I'm not sure. I mean, based on what's there.
I've typed in some generators and
they're not small.
they're not small and for a facility this size, I would imagine they have to make sure that they operate the elevators and.
So that's why there's 2.
conditioning seems to be the problem.
Landscaping is an issue and they've been cited and it's gonna be worked on and all that and you're gonna.
Yeah, and part of this would help enhance the code case because you were requiring them to submit a landscape plan and replace missing or dead plant material. So not only would they be inconsistent with the code, but then they would have a development order requiring the improvement as well.
Is there anything else planned, like programmed in that yard as far as it's not used for outdoor space? at all?
I believe the applicant is here. No. So,
So you're requiring to redo the walkway to make it a real walkway. In other words, it's probably just the side of the building. They don't use that area of the yard anyway, since everything's done in the back.
Yeah, the walkway would provide access to the back from another door.
So you're putting a walkway, landscaping, finishing the hedges, if not new hedges and some new trees.
And if you wanted to also just clarify in the landscape condition that the generator shall be fully screened with landscaping for the full height of the generator.
That was a concern.
At the fence, not on the generator.
Right, at the fence. It would be from the right of way.
Screening from the right of way.
From the right, all the right, from the where M Street and the side street.
Yes. So it'd have to-
This is gonna be a natural gas, I don't see it.
They'd be foolish not to.
Well, I mean, they do have diesels and they,
Right,
but then you'd require a tank and
right.
all kinds of everything.
So are you asking for a preference of the two locations, or were you just asking for the variance?
Those-
period?
Well, the applicant is requesting the one closer to the corner and with the location of the door and the creation of a walking path, because if the generator is put in the second location, it would block the access from that door on a improved walking surface to the rear opening of the fence to get out. So if there was if a person wanted to exit the building, but they would have to walk around the generator.
That
and
was
to-
the concern that I had, the location there showing closer to the corner seems to be where that door and walkway are, so.
It would have to be forward of the door.
You hadn't labeled which one's one and which one's two. Did you reference that in the motion?
Yes,
Mhm.
two is what their preferred is, and it's the one that the door opens onto, but you wouldn't have to walk around it.
So we would prefer one, two.
Two.
Okay,
That's the one they're asking for, right?
That's one.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, so
where-
you
One
can
where
see
the
here, here's the door,
Walkway.
here's the door, and then here's the generator location, which would probably be about around here.
And where's the walkway?
The walkway would need to connect to here because there's no break in the gate here.
Mhm.
So the walkway would need to connect to where there's an opening in the gate.
Their setbacks have to be 10 feet from both the M Street property line and the Third Avenue South property line. That's why it's 10 and 10. So is that a requirement for the generator?
It's a side setback requirement. The generator for mechanical equipment, you can waive that if you wanted to, or you can put mechanical equipment in the setback for existing structures. So they can go into the setback a little bit, but we would prefer them to adhere to the setback insofar as feasible. Because
of what?
because we don't want the noise from the generator, because they have to comply with the decibel levels as well from the property line. So that's part of why the mechanical equipment needs to be set back. So, but if it can't be set back, then there is a provision in the code for existing structures to allow it to go into the setback.
And would that have to come back before this board?
That's an administrative decision.
So yeah, that was the only thing I was thinking with the size of it in meeting the setbacks, if it was going to extend enough to block the door or have to circumnavigate it to get out of the door.
No, we can give them a little bit more flexibility, but we want them to keep it as a way close to the building and as way, because if it's a natural gas, also to where their exhaust is going to be placed will come into play because they can't exhaust into the structure either.
So I wanted to further, that's why I was asking,
Yeah.
to be further away from the
So it has to be at least 5 to 6 feet. So if you guys want it closer to the property line and you don't mind it to be 5 feet from each property line, that's fine too. I would like it to be no further forward than maybe the front, approximately about the front building, the existing front building setback where I don't want it to, the whole generator to be forward of the building if possible.
Our predominant air breeze is from the south, is from the southeast. And so any exhaust from that thing is pretty much going to go back toward the building, but those are all closed windows. It's all air conditioned in there anyway. So there's no intake vents. So they're all on the backside where the
There is
kitchen
a
is.
condition of approval in this related to the carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide
Yeah.
detectors everywhere.
Mhm.
That's good. Good to see you guys are thinking about that as
So
well.
their priority is number 2.
priorities number 2,
Mhm.
and we're giving them the little bit of flexibility within the setback to be approved by staff
Mhm.
Recommended.
or recommending.
Mhm.
Okay. So do we have a motion?
And we want the landscaping addressed.
So that if you want to clarify that the that the generator will be fully screened by landscaping, so it is not visible from the right of way, I would add that point of clarification to your motion. Otherwise, I think everything else is pretty much built in.
Yeah.
And I think we do need to also ask for public comment before we go to motion.
Oh,
All
good
right.
point.
Yes. My apologies. Do we have public comment?
No public comment, all right.
Okay. Check that box.
Someone want to make a motion?
Nadine does, she really does.
Do it, Nadine. You got this.
All right, I'm on it. Okay.
So
Get my script. I move to approve HRPB project number 22-01500005, a variance to allow a generator in the front yard along South M Street in the number 2 location, located at 504 3rd Avenue South, provided that the walkway, right, is the reconstruction of the deteriorated walking path, and that it is fully screened. Yeah, and the application meets the variance criteria based on the data and analysis in the staff report. Anything to add to that, Erin?
No, I think you guys covered it because
Alright.
did you do the fully screened? I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fully screened and the
second.
walkway, yeah.
Second, over there.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. It's unanimous.
And we're not going to kill the residents with carbon monoxide too on top of it. So
I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Okay,
All right,
on
so-
our final.
Come to planning issues.
conceptual review.
Do you need to announce this one, Steve, or?
No, you
Okay,
just
great.
go.
Perfect. Perfect. So we've got a conceptual review for potential demolition of an existing garage and then new construction of a garage and apartment structure at 122 North L Street. This is a contributing structure in the Northeast Lucerne Historic District, and it is within the mixed use East zoning district. We go to the next slide. So here we've got our location map. It's on the east side of North L Street between Lucerne and 2nd Avenue North. Next slide. So here we've got the existing principal structure. This is a multi-unit building and has been for, from what I can tell, the entire existence of the property. It was built circa 1938 in the colonial revival or wood frame minimal traditional style. This is a contributing structure, like I said. And we could go to the next slide. This is the existing garage. It was also built in 1938. Staff has been unable to determine via survey data whether or not the garage structure is considered a part of this contributing resource or whether it's a non-contributing structure on the property. If we go next, so these are the elevations that the applicant has provided so far. And they will go into that a little bit more when they come up to talk about it, but here's just a glance at them. And then if we could go to the final slide, this is just kind of a reminder of what we're working with for demolition in local historic districts. So in this case, I believe the applicant is not planning to pursue a condemnation of the structure. So you all would be eventually in charge of determining whether or not they are allowed to demolish this structure. And the applicant is here and they do have a presentation as well that they will be sharing with you all.
My name is Jim Payne and I'm the owner of the property. The building that we want to construct, as you can see in the elevations, is essentially identical in style to the building that's there and very similar in size. And the zoning allows one more unit on the property, and we would maintain the 2 garage spaces in the newly constructed building. There'd just be a new unit on the top and a garage on the bottom, and also a new laundry facility. And the front building would remain the same. And so Ms. Greening advised me to come in and just ask for a conceptual review and before we went into all the planning discussions. And so we're doing that. And I'm wondering if this board or commission is generally feels this is an acceptable thing to do on this piece of property. And the garage itself it's an extra step to ask it to be condemned by Mr. Ringel. It is very low. It floods a little bit. Whenever it rains hard, the whole south side gets wet and it's pretty beat up. And it's, it is, you see what it is. It's just a basic gable end structure, wood frame. The slab is in pretty bad shape. So it seems to me reasonable to ask that it be demolished and that we build something very similar to the existing front building in terms of detailing and style, as Ms. Greening mentioned. The styles are outlined and she sent me all the information, and I agree that those styles are most similar to what's there, and we just want to essentially be compatible. So that concludes my presentation, but I look forward to your comments.
We always need more help.
It is more housing.
Right, I mean, I have one there. One of my,
Yeah, so we had a brief pre-application meeting between our preservation team, our zoning team, and the applicant here. So yeah, we reviewed all of the requirements for ADU size and size of the structure, as well as the unit allowance for density. So yeah, we have discussed that with them.
So we have several of these applications come for. Very seldom do we have to knock down what they said in the very beginning is this constrict. Is the garage going to be considered a contributing structure because it was built at the same time as the main house? We've taken a lot of guff over the years for allowing structures, all of a sudden that little garage over there will become somebody's quaint little she shed or something like that. How could you possibly, allow that to be demolished? And I'm serious. I mean, this is people are up in arms about demolishing older. We're looking at as older structures, saying they're very not useful. But if there was no garage there, or if it was condemned, we've never had an issue if Peter Ringel condemns it. If he condemns it, I would caution. I mean, and I understand. I like the concept, and we do need housing, and you're leaving the garage there and everything else. But I would caution, the board to look at this very, very strongly, very, very closely as to the applicability of that garage being a contributing factor of that property.
One of the things that you can also do is direct the applicant to, contact the building official and have it reviewed for condemnation to review the condition of it. So I know it is that extra step, but if you all would feel more secure in understanding the condition better, and if it is really condemnable at this point, that could be a good comment at conceptual.
I mean, you might find out that the thing is totally termite ridden, have the obvious error, which is fine.
What's going to benefit us as a neighborhood or a historic district? 25 years, 50 years now, where you have an additional dwelling. And like you said, maybe termite ridden, but I agree with you have this range of things.
Would say, and then it's sort of a no-brainer at that point if it's condemned. This board has generally, we don't even have a choice, as a matter of fact. If the structure is condemned, we don't have a choice. And so that I would, like I said, we've taken a lot of heat for getting rid of structures that we didn't think were necessarily all that historic in nature. This one here mimics the style of the front house, the front property, the lap siding, the everything on it. It appears to me like it would be contributing to that property. My opinion. I'm probably wrong again, but
We just don't have the documentation on it. And, but I think that you are correct is that it would probably be.
Yeah, and we are following up also with our colleagues at the state level just to double check if they have anything. We just weren't able to get anything for tonight's meeting.
On that particular property.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, to see if their information that they have from
What is
surveys or
Do
stuff.
we have criteria in historic preservation to consider a outbuilding and it's not an ADU, it'd be just another structure that was built at the same time? Obviously, they're not down all the time, but
There's just the criteria to demolish a contributing structure. And so we'd have to pull that up and go through it.
Yeah, I don't,
Think about this shit.
It's the same for a house.
yeah. So really, it's just whether or not at the time of survey and designation, was that structure considered part of the contributing resource or was it considered separately?
in a survey that was done for that area.
Yes.
And we've had places where the principal structure was significantly modified over time, but the garage retained its original historic character, where the garage itself was designated, but the principal structure was not. So we have had that case once before, and the board did approve some modifications to that structure and expansion. It was a horizontal expansion of that as well. So it's something to consider. I think it sounds like you guys, the direction to the applicant is to go back and get some additional information on the condition of that structure, and that there's kind of a general feedback that could be okay, but we want to understand what it is that we're considering for demolition. So if the building official condemns it, we have a duty to inform you. If it is non-contributing. If it is contributing, you still have, well, it's not in a national district though, right? So if it's contributing in a national district, even if it's condemned, you still have to approve it. But this is, if it's condemned and not in a national district, which this is, then it just is condemned.
So let me understand, it's not in this national district that you're talking about.
No.
It's really a moot point, that point of this discussion. I think it's worth saying that there is no evidence Roger is considered that she is covered thus far. And there's no evidence that it was considered a contributing structure. I don't think I'd be treated fairly. You guys just said, well, it could have been. You're just speculating on what in mind.
Well, I think part of this is conceptual review is to hear what the board's concerns are. And one of their concerns is what exactly is the condition of this? And they're asking staff to get further information about the garage and for you to provide some information on the condition to the building official for consideration.
Nothing having to do with the design of the new structure. I mean, I like the design of the new structure. I would have no problem with that at all. If it
But
weren't
it's still
for
relevant if I've got just keep a little garage there and
Yeah.
fix it and keep water out of the south side.
Well, I think there's some more information to find out. And so I think we can all work on that.
All right, thanks for your advice.
Thank you.
No, but thank you for your patience and a kind of our extended presentation this evening. A lot of folks are new, so it was important for you to hear that background. And that's a discussion we're going to keep having as some of these properties are come in and are infilled over time. And it is going to be a discussion in future for adaptation, even in the longer term, which we're not facing right now, but which we'll probably be facing, within the next 50 years. So that's our new horizon. And so we're trying to get ready for that. And there's going to be some things that we need to look at to get ready for that.
I would just have to say, I concur with. That we're great territories here and see how the streetscape. Both of neighborhoods are changing
with the realities of having to build.
Like, I'm just on that note, when they talk about, and Greg, Richter also brought it up tonight too, that we're dealing with, when you're dealing with new construction inside a historic neighborhood, we're dealing with something, and they say it's compatibility. Geez, I've heard the ultra modern house that we are, there's a duplex on, no, on J Street.
I think it's possible.
I like it. I like it, but I've heard a lot of negative comments about it because it doesn't fit the neighborhood.
So in a historic district, you don't have to, in fact, you're discouraged to replicate to the point of architecture of falsely mimicking. So you can have things that are compatible in scale and massing. You can have complementary architecture. What we have such a variety of architecture in Lake Worth Beach, it's hard to say that modern doesn't fit because we have so much mid-century modern. We have a lot of modern actually in our historic context. Everybody likes the frame vernacular who lived here. They like the cottagey, right? It's super cutie, and we all love it. But there is, in the greater context, there is a lot of modern. Also, too, when we're looking at managing our historic district, kind of one of the philosophies of the historic district, because the architecture is so diverse in our districts, is we're looking at what is going to be contributing in the next 50 years when that building's 50 years old. And so our review criteria are set up so that if you propose an architectural style, your job is to make sure that whatever architectural style is proposed, that it is true and authentic to the architectural style. So we are getting high quality, high design that will become contributing in its own right as indicative of this period, as an infill, as a balance. So now that's something, if a more traditional is desired, maybe in a particular subcontext, and you feel like, hey, this is just really too weird for this particular application because of the surrounding homes, you could give direction to applicant to redesign for that context. But that is why we allow modern. We have modern,
Right.
and
It's two different things. So, in 6 years, style. Say that. When it started with frame time.
we actually have more modern than frame vernacular. We have more mid-century modern, and
So, and this is also. I see the private cell on me, like there. Versus different, whatever, so. As. Again, this possibility of as such bills, that you would see. Those different styles and I.
Like Greg Richard pointed out that, well, it used to be this big and now it's this big, right?
Right.
So that's the other concern, that every time something gets a lot that's rebuilt, and guarantee they're gonna take the maximum possible.
Street to alley, yeah.
And we did review our land development regulations citywide, and that is part of why we have our total impermeable surface, our maximum wall height at setback. Those were things that were not there 20 years ago. So you can't max out a box to the maximum setback and to the maximum height. So you're going to have to set in that top story if you're at setback, or you're going to have to do something to fit it in. But if there is an issue with massing and you feel, so the one we saw tonight, right, is on a 75-foot wide lot. It's a significantly large lot. It's got a 60-foot setback. So that is a different compatibility issue than the compatibility issue that you are typically facing, which is on our more typical 50 by 135 or 60 by, 80 foot lots, 75 foot lots. So that compatibility issue is where if you do a McMansion on one of those, that's going to be really significantly felt by the neighbor far more than the larger lot with the 60-foot setback.
That house you had, had an example of third and north lakeside.
Mhm.
No,
It's looking awesome. Have you guys,
Mhm.
I don't know if I
I
said
wish they'd give us a tour when you're done, because it's looking really interesting, really nice.
Well, will that one qualify for our design awards?
Hopefully.
Yeah, we gotta do that.
Maybe not this year, depending on when it gets done,
Yeah.
but we've jotted it down. Yen and I have jotted it down for if it doesn't make this year, keep in mind for the future. So, yeah.
Cool house.
And Annie and Yen we're coming up, we've been doing some brainstorming sessions. We're going to try to bring back a lot of stuff that we stopped doing because of the pandemic and because of our turnover, our loss of staff. Because we had such great staff, everybody took them, basically. And now we have great staff again.
Great stuff, you can't stay here for a while.
So, but we're going to do some cool stuff. We're going to do the awards. We're looking at markers. I'd love to do a marker if we can find some interesting, African American heritage points or some, points of historic preservation related to that reflects the diversity of the community. So we're going to be looking at that. We're also going to be looking at funding opportunities to address typology and adaptation for sea level rise over the longer term. Super fun. I'm so excited about that. Love to want to nerd out on that. And then we're going to also be looking at our marker program, our plaques, which need to say Lake Worth Beach now. So we're going to do that. And so for people who are eligible to buy a plaque and have it placed on their building, we're going to run that program as well.
You just have to be a part of the historic district, ask us for a plaque and pay for it.
It's hard to get a plaque.
No, it's just, no, so the plaque will say the build date, but
Right now, the existing bronze plaque, gas set. The ones, the city logo, what's on there is like,
Right.
have a problem. Putting on.
Hand out Sharpies.
So the ones for the individual homes have, for. So once we get all that onto that logo, a space problem. Can you find an old one? It's complicated by.
Well, we have the old ones. It just has the wrong city name on them. So we are hesitant.
When my house was built,
Okay, no. We're not going to do that.
the house was built before.
All right. Are you guys ready to adjourn?
I wanted to say, Annie, excellent presentations tonight. Thank you. Very good.
We're so lucky to have both Annie and Yen. They have been rock stars since they've come. And just to give a shout out to Yen was hired first when there was nobody here, and he worked like a maniac for 3 months to catch us all up on permits and had a big learning curve and just jumped right in. And then Annie has been killing it since she's arrived as well. So we're extremely, extremely lucky to have these two on staff. And we've been getting a lot of positive feedback from our customers.
I can see why. And Sherry, you're doing good too.
Well, all right. So the time.